The Luck Brokers, by Elton Gar. It was a busy day at Morning Brews, with 3 people in the line and 2 more waiting for their orders to be made. Mia liked it that way. The day went faster when she was busy, and she was able to see more of her regulars, even if there wasn't much time to visit. That was one of the reasons she wanted to start her own coffee shop, one where people were encouraged to sit and enjoy themselves rather than rush in and out. People needed a chance to slow down and take a break, even if that wasn't the most profitable. She did her best to do that here, moving quickly while trying to keep a relaxed calm and making a real attempt to make every person's day better. She handed a large mocha to a woman who seemed intent on trying to rush, even when that wouldn't make things go any faster. "How much do I owe you?" the woman asked, and Mia saw the beginnings of a complaint on her face. "You seem to be in a hurry." "Don't worry about it." The woman seemed confused for a moment, then muttered something about stealing from her bosses and walked out. She didn't bother to explain herself to the woman, but no one cared if she gave away a cup of coffee to keep the customers happy, though she doubted some people were ever happy. Then she saw him, the same man who had come in the last 4 days. It wasn't unusual for new people to come in, or even for someone to come in a few days in a row. People came into town for business for a few days and then left. But he had stood out. The main reason was that when he had gone to get his coffee, his suit jacket had opened, and she had seen a gun. Carrying wasn't all that uncommon, but it still caught her attention, so she watched him more carefully. That had led her to realize he didn't drink the coffee he bought. Since he paid almost $8 for it, that seemed strange, though not that much more strange than paying $8 for a coffee. When she opened her store, it would be priced so anyone could visit and enjoy the store. But then she didn't need or even want to be rich. She just wanted to help her mother and brother out with their bills and not have to worry about paying her own. Today, the man in the black suit was standing against one of the doors, watching her. At first, she thought he might just be looking at the menu, but as she moved, so did his eyes. And he had bought the same thing every day he had come in. "Hey Sarah, I think that guy's watching me," Mia said. She knew what her roommate would say, but she also knew that Sarah would watch out for her. "He's cute. There's no one in the apartment if you want me to cover the rest of your shift. Just stick with me today. He's been acting odd. He doesn't even drink the coffee." "Because he's not here for the coffee," Sarah said, but her voice was a tad more serious. By that afternoon, when the store finally slowed down, Mia had almost entirely forgotten about the strange man. He had only been there for 20 minutes. And in the end, he had just bought his coffee, and then dumped the entire cup along with the coffee into the trash on the way out. But he had still drawn enough attention to himself, that when she saw him get out of his car, she turned to go back inside. Had he really waited outside for hours just to talk to her? But as the door opened, he said, "Wait, I'm here to help." With the door open and Sarah inside, Mia decided she'd give him a few seconds to explain himself before she maced him and rushed inside. "Hurry up," she said, her hands wrapping around the plastic spray bottle attached to her keychain. The man looked around and said, "You've been marked as lucky. Do you know about luck extraction?" Mia had heard rumors and conspiracy stories about the luck brokers. She took it about as seriously as the stories that rich people bathed in baby blood to have better skin. It was entirely untrue, but if you squinted and turned your head, you could see the truth from there. They really did use people with no care or regard for them. "Those stories are crazy, and so are the people who believe them," Mia said. "I understand. I didn't believe them until I was hired. But my benefactor wants to keep you safe. So he sent you out of the kindness of his heart?" Mia asks. "No, they're as bad as the rest. But they don't have the resources in this area to safely make you disappear, so they want to make it more difficult for the competition. But at least this time I get to help someone. If they're a monster, why do you work for them? The same reason you will if you know what's good for you. Without someone to protect me, I'd be captured and my luck extracted. That would kill me. This way I can take care of my family and try to make things better." Mia stood there, looking at the man, the first hints of gray in his hair and the bulge in his suit where the gun sat, and saw him differently than before. He wasn't a good guy. She was certain of that, but perhaps he was doing his best. She couldn't expect someone to sacrifice themselves when it wouldn't change anything. "So what do I do?" Mia asks. The man reached into his jacket, and for a moment, she was sure he had simply lied to get her to relax and then shoot her. But instead he pulled out an envelope and said, "Read this over. There is a plane ticket inside. If you're willing to work with my benefactor, use the ticket and look for someone holding up a sign for Mr. Biddlesworth." "Who is Mr. Biddlesworth?" "You are. We don't want anyone to know who you are. Your benefactor can't make me disappear here, so they want me to come to where they are at. Read the contract. There are other options. But they've been fair with me, or as fair as this type of work can be," the man said. "You mean the type of work that you can't quit, unless you want to die?" Mia said, "Fair enough. But then is your boss going to keep paying for your health care if you quit?" Mia stood looking at the envelope as the man got in his car and drove away. The job was every bit as easy as it had been described in the contracts that Mia had felt compelled to sign to avoid being hunted by the other luck brokers. Most days Mia didn't do anything except stay near her phone in case she was needed. But there were busier days. Days when the benefactor, Mrs. Fitchett, sent a letter to another billionaire and thought it was safer to send someone than use email. The first time it happened, she came into the room and one of Mrs. Fitchett's 3 bodyguards handed her a small letter and a round-trip first-class ticket to Denver. Mia, who had only spoken to Mrs. Fitchett twice, said, "I really don't need to go first class." The woman smiled, though it was more predatory than friendly, and said, "The letter is important and so it goes first class. Besides, I earned more than the cost of the ticket in the time it took you to ask me about it." Mia bought the best laptop she could find, a few dresses that wouldn't embarrass her employer, and spent several days a week on long first-class plane rides. At the end of each of those rides, she met another one of the luck brokers. Billionaires who had enough money, power, and influence to have people killed for their luck without any ramifications. Except sometimes if those worked for another of the brokers. Not that that was that much different from being wealthy, from what she could see. And for most of them, it was just about adding to their advantages or fear other people would get ahead of them. Then about a month into her employment, she was called to Mrs. Fitchett's office, a room that was as close to a spa as an office. She stood there awkwardly, while the 60-year-old woman who employed her was having a massage. Mrs. Fitchett ignored her for almost 15 minutes and then said, "You had 2 flights delayed last week. There were mechanical problems." "I got on the next flight," Mia said. She could hear the frustration in the woman's voice. "I can't have that." "You're going to have an infusion," Mrs. Fitchett said. "A what?" Mia asked. "One of my bodyguards took a bribe without telling me. Luckily, I overheard him. He's not as innately lucky as you, but almost no one is. But adding his luck to yours should make your flights go more smoothly," the woman said. "But doesn't that kill him?" Mia asked, her voice breaking as she said it. She didn't want to be part of this. "He killed himself when he betrayed me." "You didn't think I stayed in control by getting massages, did you?" Mrs. Fitchett said. "And why not just take his luck for yourself?" Mia asked. "The same reason I didn't go through his pockets for change. The more you have of something, the less valuable it is to you. The amount of luck I'd get from him wouldn't matter. But it will make you more efficient, and that has value to me. And if you decide to betray me as well, I can always take his luck at the same time I take yours." "What do I have to do?" Mia said. She wanted to say no. She wanted to run. But she didn't think either of those would do anything but get her killed. "Don't eat for the next 12 hours. It's not actually surgery, but they do put you out for it, and it's safer if you don't eat." Mia didn't think that would be a problem. She felt too sick to eat. And as she left, she looked at the bodyguards, trying to remember all of their faces to determine who was dying to make her a bit more lucky. But she didn't know any of them well. She'd have to change that. Mia found herself in an inconspicuous, sterile-looking clinic on the outskirts of the city. She had followed Mrs. Fitchett's instructions to the letter, fasting for the required 12 hours. The whole process felt surreal. The clinic staff, dressed in white coats and masks even outside of anywhere they were needed, were efficient but not particularly warm. They treated the luck infusion as routine, which was both reassuring and unsettling. As she lay on the sterile examination table, an anesthesiologist placed a mask over her face. Inhaling deeply, she quickly drifted into unconsciousness. When Mia regained consciousness, she felt groggy and disoriented. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and she struggled to focus her thoughts. As the fog in her mind lifted, she noticed a nurse by her side checking her vital signs. "Welcome back," the nurse said with a friendly smile. "You're going to feel a bit off for a while." That's perfectly normal after the procedure. Mia blinked a few times, trying to clear her head. How long was I out? About 2 hours, the nurse replied. You're doing great, considering. But then, I guess you're lucky. Considering the circumstances, Mia thought. She realized that she had accepted this bizarre turn of events with surprising ease. Was it the result of the infusion, or had she simply become numb to the increasingly surreal world she now inhabited? After a brief recovery period, Mia was allowed to leave the clinic. She had a small bandage on her arm, concealing the site where the procedure had taken place. As she stepped outside, the rain stopped, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent in the air. It was as though the world had been cleansed, but Mia couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a Faustian bargain. Then, a few seconds after she got into her car, it began to rain again, and she hated herself for liking this. Over the next few days, Mia couldn't deny the changes in her life. Flights went off without a hitch, and her moments of good luck multiplied. Small wins in everyday situations became a regular occurrence. It was as if the universe itself had shifted in her favor. In many ways, it was similar to having money, as Mrs. Fitchett had suggested. It was easy enough to survive on less, so long as that was what you were used to, but once you had a taste, it felt impossible to give it up. That was, of course, the trap. Mrs. Fitchett had given Mia a taste of a drug far more intoxicating than any other. Mia had power, and the more she had, the more she wanted. You can't be serious, Sarah said, having moved into the 3-bedroom apartment with Mia. It was in one of the most expensive places to live in the country, and was still bigger than the apartment they had shared. Mrs. Fitchett said that she would be careful who she picked out. She only takes the luck from the type of people who shouldn't be lucky. And then you'd be able to work with me, Mia said. She still wasn't close to Mrs. Fitchett, but she understood the woman well enough to get what she wanted from her. And then I'd be trapped the same way you are. Everyone is trapped all the time. I was trapped working for tips, and now I'm trapped flying first class, eating the best food, and wearing expensive clothes. You weren't trapped at morning brews. You weren't paid enough, but you enjoyed the people, and you got to spend time with your family. When was the last time you called your mom? I get to pay her mortgage, so she doesn't have to work extra shifts at the hospital every week, Mia said. And she spends that extra time thinking about how she isn't able to see her daughter, Sarah said. I'm just trying to help my friend. If you don't want to be here, then you don't have to, Mia said. It was frustrating how much Sarah had changed. She had known her friend was jealous of her luck, but she hadn't known it had got so bad that she'd turned down the chance to improve her life just to spite Mia. But Mia had a plan, and if it worked, she could not only destroy the luck brokers, but change the entire world for the better, and she thought Sarah might be willing to help with that plan even if she didn't like what they had to do. It was the 5th time that Mia had visited the small, abandoned hospital on the end of the city. The surgeons and nurses that Mrs. Fitchett paid to be here waited with their masks on. But this time it was Mia, and not Mrs. Fitchett, who had sent for them. Mia knew that her entire plot could have been uncovered by a single phone call. But she had become used to things working out the way she wanted, and she knew no one would make that call. Getting out of the sports car that she had bought with the money she had earned, buying penny stocks that almost inevitably exploded in value, she walked up to them. I'm here to make an inspection, she said. But the other patient is already prepped and ready for the extraction, the doctor said. And I intend to see the process. But the recipient will be Sarah. In the back of her car, Sarah glared at her. Her hands were bound, and one of the guards sat at either side of her. We were assured that all recipients would be willing. Why would you want to give luck to someone who doesn't want it? The doctor said. Once she understands, she will thank me. And either way, I trust her, Mia said. The guards helped Sarah out of the car. She didn't cry out. Not that it would have done any good. There had been a few neighbors once, but Mrs. Fitchett had slowly bought up their houses and let them sit empty. Something about that didn't entirely sit right with Mia. She had driven past people without homes on the way here, but she wasn't going to change the world by ignoring the way it was. They took Sarah into an area that Mia had never been in before. It was similar in almost every way to the section of the old hospital that she had been in, but the small differences made it oppressive. The doors, instead of being wooden, were metal, and there were locks on the outside. Only one of the doors was shut. Mia wished she couldn't see into the rooms with old metal hospital beds with restraints on all of them. Sarah was taken into one of them and the nurse said, "Do we need to restrain her? She won't hurt anyone, but she might try to get away." "The lock should be sufficient," Mia said. The nurse didn't say anything, but she took out a large keychain and locked the door behind them with a loud click. She then said, "What would you like to see?" "Everything you have about the procedure," Mia said. "The science is complicated. I don't think the doctors understand it, but the procedure is fairly easy. I can't speak to anywhere else since we're not in contact with them. But no one has ever died during the procedure or even been injured. Except of course the donors," Mia said. "Everything was quite clear that they died. No, they are quite safe during the extraction process. Though it's painful, so they are kept sedated. But I've been told they all die," Mia said. "They do. But not because of the extraction. At least not directly. It's more like after they have their luck extracted, the universe actively wants them dead. And it always gets its way. I saw one man who was kept safe in a padded room for almost a week. He choked to death on a warm broth. I wouldn't have believed it was possible." "So it's impossible to live without any luck," Mia said. "Which means everyone has at least some. So no one is safe," the nurse said, and Mia suspected that most of the luck brokers didn't know that. If they did, they'd focus their attention on more vulnerable people. They'd have less luck to steal, but it would be trivial to do it. That was useful to know, but it wasn't why she was here. So Mia allowed herself to be led into the surgery room. After making sure she was sterile and masked, she was shown around. It was every bit as simple as they said. In truth, it was easier than they implied. You didn't actually need to be sedated. The process was just painful. The transference itself was similar in some ways to a bone marrow transplant. A big needle attached to a device similar in shape to a gun and a few machines. How that moved luck was beyond the understanding of anyone here. A few minutes later, Sarah was wheeled in by the 2 bodyguards. There were 3 doctors and 2 nurses in the room, but none of them were expecting anything or particularly well-trained, so when Sarah drew her gun, they were taken entirely off guard. The bodyguards easily subdued them while Mia took the gun-like tool that was used to draw out luck and said, "So you put it against the back of the person's spine just above the shoulder blades." She put it there as she spoke. The donor was on his stomach already sedated. "It's not as easy as that. It is precise," the doctor said. "Don't worry about it. I'm pretty lucky," she said and pulled the trigger. It was harder than she expected, and the machine slid a quarter of an inch to what must have been the perfect place, because it drew out something that looked exactly as had been described. Over the next hour, she tested the procedure first on the nurses and then the doctors. As they realized what was happening, they struggled, but it didn't do them much good. "I still don't like this," Sarah said. "It stops them from doing it to anyone else," Mia said, as she injected her friend with the luck of 6 people, though only one of them was considered lucky. Without the sedation, it was exceptionally painful, and the 2 guards had to hold Sarah down to keep her from being injured. A few minutes later, they walked out, and Mia allowed herself to focus on the knowledge that all of the people were still alive. She hadn't killed anyone. Though as they left the building, she heard a crash and someone screamed. She didn't go back. It was easier not to know. Besides, there wasn't a lot of time. Mrs. Fitchett would find out what she did soon, and while the woman wouldn't really care about the loss of easily replaceable people, she would care about Mia acting as a rival. The car pulled into the parking garage of their luxurious apartment building, and they made their way to their penthouse. Once inside, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line. She had stolen the luck of the doctors and nurses, just as Mrs. Fitchett had done to her. It left a bitter taste in her mouth, but she convinced herself it was for a greater cause, to bring down the luck brokers. Despite her fear, Mia needed to confront the woman who had changed her life so dramatically. As Mia entered the office, Mrs. Fitchett sat behind her expansive desk, exuding an air of authority. "I must say I'm impressed with your audacity," she remarked. "You've always been a wild card." Mia took a deep breath and said, "You've exploited people for far too long. I had to put a stop to it." Mrs. Fitchett chuckled, her eyes cold and calculating. "You're a breath of fresh air, Mia. Do you think you're the first person who wanted to change the game? I've seen people like you come and go. They never truly understand the rules of this world. You may have taken luck, but you can't change human nature." Mia couldn't help but feel a growing sense of desperation. She had hoped to have time to act against her benefactor before she knew what had happened. That left her with no real choice. She had hoped to use the knowledge that she had gathered as a courier to slip into the strongholds of other luck brokers and use the machine against them. Instead, she had to move against Mrs. Fitchett, so she glanced at the two bodyguards. They weren't who she had hoped would be here, but the cold and calculating Mrs. Fitchett didn't treat any of her people well, and they all knew that other members of her bodyguard disappeared alarmingly often. That level of distrust and paranoia had advantages. It was almost impossible for anyone who worked for Mrs. Fitchett to trust anyone else, keeping them isolated and afraid. But it also meant they had no loyalty to anyone but themselves. Luck might have won out before, but Mia was far luckier than before, and she had gone out of her way to make the guards trust her. As the guards stepped forward, Mia said, "This is your time. She's kept herself so isolated and hidden that no one knows who she is. If we work together, I can replace her and make things better for all of us. Don't even think about it. Just get her," Mrs. Fitchett said. The guards looked at the old woman and then at Mia, and one of them said, "I think it's time to go get some coffee." The two large men walked past Mia, who removed the extraction device. Mia grabbed the woman's arm, and the struggle was short, as Mrs. Fitchett had never been forced to defend herself, and Mia had grown up poor and often had to defend herself. Injecting herself with Mrs. Fitchett's luck was more difficult than injecting someone else. It was also the first time she had injected herself with luck that had been stolen twice. It felt washed out, but she could sense the flow of luck in herself. The luck pulsed and pushed out, touching the world, shifting it carefully not to Mia's hopes or dreams but to what was best for her. Over the next weeks, she discovered what that meant. She made some attempts to dismantle the web of power that Mrs. Fitchett had created, but the luck worked against that at every chance. She even understood why. It didn't care about morality or about other people. It didn't even really care about Mia. So long as she didn't fight the luck, it gave her almost anything. Power, money, even love, all in a mindless attempt to protect her from danger. So over the next years, she became Mrs. Fitchett. Sarah was the first to leave. The only person who truly knew who Mia was, and the person who felt most safe in leaving. But soon others left. She let them go, trusting to her luck and the fear she had created to keep her safe. Each person that was gone was one small piece of Mia gone with them. One link to her old life broken, until one day, she found herself ordering a courier she had recruited to deliver a message to one of the other luck brokers without even considering how to end the system. She realized that the woman who had enjoyed working at the coffee shop, enjoyed spending nights with her friends, and even in some ways enjoyed the game of stretching a dollar, was gone entirely. And she couldn't even bring herself to mourn for the loss.
Author's note. All too often when we look at people's actions, we discount the systems that put them in the position. Whether it is the difficulty of competing while holding yourself to a higher moral standard than your competition, or simple desperation, people make mistakes and bad decisions. The systems are what creates rules that insist corporations maximize profits over what's good for their employees, and then we complain because they cut wages and jobs to maximize profits. We create a system designed to have winners and losers and then punish those who break the law to survive after they lose. None of that means people aren't or shouldn't be responsible for their actions. Whether it is a CEO busting unions and cutting wages or a person stealing food to eat, they are responsible for their actions. But that doesn't mean that the solution is just to punish them. Part of the solution has to be looking for ways to fix the system. Perhaps we better incentivize treating employees fairly or ensure that losing your job doesn't mean risking starvation. None of it is easy. But unlike simply blaming the individual, changing the system can actually improve things for everyone. I hope this story was able to illustrate how even people who want to change the systems can get caught up in them. How good people can become cogs in a wheel that is bad and how difficult changing the system can be. But also that it is worth the effort. If you enjoyed this story, then you should sign up for my newsletter at www.sci-fi.com. Just look for the link that says free book. I give away free short stories there every week. You can also listen to audio versions of my stories at my YouTube channel and Sci-Fi. And if you want to vote on the Patreon exclusive stories I write, then you can become a patron and get access to all the Patreon exclusive stories and voting at www.patreon.com/Elton. Thank you. Elton Gar.